Hi, and welcome to our next episode of our podcast on the Gospel of John. So, this week we're going to be covering chapters 4 and 5, which is a lot. So, it's a really good thing that Karen has decided to be retired and become a social media influencer because otherwise she wouldn't have the time to prepare for this. All right. So, we decided we were just going to jump right in because there's a lot to cover. And we're going to be starting with the woman at the well. So, starting right at John 4, verse 1. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself, but the disciples who had baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. So he came to the Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well with his sons and his flocks drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water that I give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life." The woman said, "Sir, give me this water so I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and call back." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your true husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and it is now here, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you." Just then his disciples came, and they were astonished that he was speaking with a woman. But no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me everything I have ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" They left the city and were on their way to him. So where would you like to start, Karen? Because there is so much right there.
Well, maybe just start at the beginning and the fact that Jesus had to go through Samaria because Jews in those days usually would walk way extra miles to avoid it because there was such hatred between them.
Yeah. And it's almost like there was this reason that he said he had to do this. Like that he was trying to say that there was a divine appointment. I got to go this way. And I'm sure the disciples were like, "We don't go that way. You don't understand." And we also know that he would have known that having grown up in the area. So
Mhm.
he would have grown up his whole life taking the long way. But I think it's important because he's really showing it's not really about geography. He was here for everybody and he didn't carve out pieces.
And I think that she is not a random Samaritan.
Definitely, definitely not.
And the timing was, he knew what she was going through. And like several other incidents in the Gospels, he came specifically for her.
Yeah, he definitely did. Yeah, and I'd also plug in that one of the things you and I were talking about before the podcast even started. That as I was studying for this week's episode, uh, what really stuck out to me was just the history of Samaria and how this woman really tells the story. Like it was truly this woman he needed to have this story to really tell the whole thing. And just for those at home, I'm going to go ahead and read something from uh, 2 Kings 17:24. And this is where it talks about the history of Samaria and how we got to this place. It says, the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Kutah, Ava, Hamath, and Sever, and placed them in cities of Samaria in place of the people of Israel's. They took possession of Samaria and settled there in its cities. When they settled there, they did not worship the Lord. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them that killed some of them. So the king of Assyria was told, the nations that you have carried away and placed in the cities of Samaria do not know the law of the God of the land. Therefore he sent lions among them, and they are killing them because they do not know the law of the God of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, send there one of the priests who you carried away from there. Let him go and live there and teach them the law of the God of the land. So one of the priests they had carried away from Samaria came and lived in Bethel, and he taught them how they should worship the Lord. And that's super interesting because one, Bethel, that's where Jacob saw the ladder we just talked about, right? So it's a very specific place that they've gone back to. But there are also 5 nations, just like this woman had 5 husbands, right? So there are 5 different places that they went. And some of these people were brought in specifically. The reason the king of Syria would do this would be to weaken the area. Because if you started mixing cultures, all of a sudden they didn't have a combined identity that would rise up. And some of these people were horrible. I mean, it actually says, if you go down just a little bit further in 2 Kings 17, it talks about the Seraphites and how they actually did child sacrifice. And they were burning children alive. And that was how they worshiped. And they were doing this in Bethel, which had to have been the most horrible thing ever. One of the things that we talk about is that what does Satan want to stop? And that's godly offspring, because that continues on the lineage and the knowledge of Christ. So having right at Bethel, people killing off, children would have been especially horrific to God. And so I love the alliteration of the lions coming in, because it's like the Lion of Judah coming in to vanquish Satan. Like there's so much there. And so to your point, Karen, it had to be this woman, because even now she's living with a man that's not her husband, which is kind of like the Samaritans were doing right then. They weren't really married to anybody. They were kind of living a little not right. They weren't worshiping Jerusalem like they were supposed to. They had their own temple.
And I have to tell you that this is one of the characters in scripture that I always feel like I have to defend. Because throughout the centuries, they have, or I guess maybe it's in more modern times, when we read this and that she had 5 husbands and she's living with someone who wasn't her husband, how many sermons have you heard taught where she was a sinful woman? Women in those days could not initiate divorce. So she may have been widowed. She may have been divorced, not of her own will. And if you were a woman divorced, you had to find someone else to take you into their household, or you were going to be reduced to begging or prostitution. Living with a man who is not her husband, that could be either a Levirate marriage where her husband's brother married her, or it could just be a man, whether a relative or not, who brought her into her household just to protect her and make sure that she had food and shelter and all those things. And so I always, when I read this story, I just have this desire to defend her.
I've always wondered the exact same thing, because it never says that she was divorced 5 times, that she was kicked out of her home 5 times. It never says why she had 5 husbands, just that she did have 5 husbands. And I know growing up, there was a family in our church, and it was horrible. The poor woman had 3 husbands die on her, and in rapid succession. So she had the one that was the father of her children, and then she remarried, and that one died in 2 years, and then she remarried, and that one died in 2 years. Like, it was really bad. Well, what if that's what happened with this poor woman? I mean, she's obviously not a social outcast, because she was able to go back and get the whole city.
Right. It could be, some people act as if misfortune is contagious. Like there's this person who's had all these bad things happen to her, and that either they're talking about her in whatever way, or they don't want to be around her because what do you say to somebody who's been through all that,
Yeah. And it's totally not fair. It's totally not fair to have this person that, has become a vessel of the ministry of Christ, and yet somehow we villainize this person.
Right.
And it's almost, I hate to say it, but un-American. Like we've pronounced her guilty without, hearing all the facts.
Because
And
Jesus never tells her to repent,
mm-mm,
doesn't tell her to go and sin no more. And she clearly is seeking spiritual knowledge because she knows a lot. She isn't just out in the, home feeling sorry for herself. She knows the Messiah's promise. She knows what the Messiah is going to do. And she is open and receptive to the idea that Jesus is the Messiah.
is the
We
Messiah.
can compare her to Nicodemus, who really didn't get it when he should
Right.
have. And this woman, who by all rights shouldn't get it, does.
Does. Exactly. There are some theologians who think that she must have been a prostitute. She must have been this horrible person because she was there at noon. That wasn't the water
Mhm.
drawing hour. Normally it would have been in the morning and it would have been an evening. And the hypothesis that is put out there is that she's there at noon because she's trying to avoid other people
Right,
and the scandal, and that's why she wants the living water so that she doesn't have to go back around those people anymore. And you hit the exact thing that I've thought many times is like, but why would she go to the exact people she's trying to avoid
right,
when
right,
she goes back into town? And how do we know that she just didn't, oh my gosh, I need more water. Let me run out to the well and get more water,
right.
right? Like we don't know that.
And I wonder too, and this might be off the wall, but as eagerly as they accepted her testimony, perhaps she imagined what they were thinking about her. Perhaps she had avoided them because she thought
That's
they were
possible.
thinking things, because we do that a lot of times. And
Which
I don't
really
know if
is,
it makes much difference, but they did accept her testimony pretty easily.
well, it's really interesting because what you're talking about here then becomes almost like the three methods of grace, right? So you had the prevenient grace that kind of drew her to Christ at the well, and then you had the justifying grace in that moment where she receives it, but then also she receives it from the people of the town that she didn't know she was going to get.
Right,
And then the story kind of ends with the sanctifying grace of the whole town coming to realize
right.
that Christ is the Messiah in the Samaritan town. That's very interesting, Karen. I had never made that leap until just now. Once again, for those of you at home, this is why you should come to Bible study.
Absolutely.
All right. So, in the interest of time, I think we should probably move on to our next story. So, if you
Okay.
want to go ahead and read John 4:43 to 54, the official son.
After 2 days, Jesus left for Galilee. Jesus himself had testified that prophets have no honor in their own country. When he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him because they had seen all the things he had done in Jerusalem during the festival, for they had also been at the festival. He returned to Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. In Capernaum, there was a certain royal official whose son was sick. When he heard that Jesus was coming from Judea to Galilee, he went out to meet him and asked Jesus if he would come and heal his son, for his son was about to die. Jesus said to him, "Unless you see miraculous signs and wonders, you won't believe." The royal official said to him, "Lord, come before my son dies." Jesus replied, "Go home. Your son lives." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and set out for his home. While he was on his way, his servants were already coming to meet him. They said, "Your son lives." So he asked them at what time his son had started to get better. And they said, "The fever left him yesterday about 1 o'clock in the afternoon." Then the father realized that this was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son lives." And he and his entire household believed in Jesus. This was the second miraculous sign Jesus did while going from Judea to Galilee.
What I find so interesting about this is that it's the first time that we see that he does a miracle only with his words. So he's not there. He's just saying, you know what, go ahead, go back. I took care of it. I didn't need to be there. And it really demonstrates the omnipresence of God, that he doesn't have to physically be there. He's already there. And the fact that this official who probably had a hard time cerebrally understanding that because he
Right,
works in the king's court, right? Like, and the king does what he does, but he's got to be there to do it, right? To see that happen, I'm sure I can only picture the face when he's like, what time did that happen? Right. Because he would have been the only one that would have made that connection.
right. And there's a good chance that when he turned around and went home, well, it does say that he believed that Jesus spoke, but there still had to be some little inkling of wonder if it
Yeah.
was really going to be.
Yeah.
And this really takes us back to Genesis 1 again,
Does.
where God speaks the world into existence and Jesus spoke this child into health and life.
Yeah. And there's a lot of comfort into that because, especially for us today, because Jesus is not walking the streets of Berlin, Maryland,
Right.
right?
Right.
And the fact that he can just speak it and it happens. And that's the ultimate reason we can have our faith. It's because of this. And I think that having this happen to this man 2,000 years ago, I mean, what a blessing that is to us today.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So when you think about this, how do you feel that this turns to the I am statement of I am the resurrection and the life?
Well, very literally, he was life for this child. And I'm assuming it's a child. It could have been a grown son, but he was life for this person who was about to die.
In the New Revised Standard Version I'm doing, it says little boy.
Okay. Okay. Mine just says son. But resurrection would have been not just for the one who is actually healed, but for the father as well, because his whole life would change at that moment. I thought he was dead and now he's alive, just like that prodigal's father.
Well, I think there's also a story in there that is really to us as parents, that the way that we live out our faith really ties back to our children, because it says that at the end, I think it was in the very last verse where it says that he believed along with his whole household. If it hadn't been for the father's faith to go in the first place, what would have happened with the household generations down the line?
Right, right. And it does take us to a contrast between the modern thought that we all have to confess for ourselves, that it is all a very personal faith, and the ancient thought that the faith of the father was the faith of the household, including the servants. And so it takes us there too, that because this had happened and the father accredited it to Jesus, because the other people in the household would, like you said, they wouldn't have known
Right,
what caused the son to live.
right, right. And when you look at the faith that he had to have, I mean, he was an officer in the king's court. So what is he doing? He's saying, "Hey, Mr. King, I need a day off." Because this guy that's walking around that nobody knows if he's a prophet or a charlatan at this point,
Mhm.
he's my only prayer for my kid. So when he had to take that leap of faith, it was a big leap of faith for him.
I wonder if we can kind of wonder if this is a Gentile or not as well.
It's possible. It's possible.
I mean, he could have been Herod's servant, but hard to say.
But I wanted to go back to Joshua because, as you know, that's candidly my favorite book of the Bible. So, but 24:15. Now, if you're unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, or the gods your ancestors served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you're living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
Right.
And so Joshua's God, and they're having this conversation like, this is what we're going to do, right? God, and for telling the people, like, we are serving the Lord. You choose you do you. But I know what God's done for us in the past, and I believe he can do it in the future. That would lead me to that this is a Jewish person who's believing he is the Messiah. We know that not everybody who served in Herod's court was Jewish. There were non-Jewish because Herod wasn't. He was Roman. So he was placed there by Caesar. He was
Well, he was
governor.
placed by Caesar, but he wasn't a Roman. He was kind of a Jew with an asterisk. He was an
Yes.
Idumean.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Because the Sadducees were really the aristocratic Jews of
Right.
the time. And I don't think he was really well liked by them based
No,
on
not a
what we
bit.
saw. So they kind of saw him as a sellout, I think.
Pardon me?
I think they saw him as a sellout to Rome.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So last segment we had for today was to do the healing at Bethsaida, which is John 5:1-15. So I'll go ahead and read that just to carry through our bouncing back and forth on the readers. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jerusalem went up to. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there was a pool, called in Hebrew Bethsaida, which has 5 porticos. And these lay many ill, blind, lame, and paralyzed people. One man who was there had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The ill man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. While I make my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and he began to walk. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat." But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who was the man who said to you, 'Take it up and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. So I think it's interesting about the whole, they were so tied up on someone told you to pick up your mat and walk.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. It's like, I think even as Christians, we can get so wrapped up into the legalism of our faith that we completely forget the spirit of what God is trying to tell us. Because that whole "don't carry your load on the Sabbath" was because they weren't honoring the Sabbath. And it
Right.
was like they were working and they were carrying loads back and forth. It was not unlawful for this gentleman to be sitting by the pool, which one could argue was his working of the time because that's all he could do,
Mhm.
right? But yet him getting up and walking and carrying a mat was somehow sacrilegious. And I'm not even able to wrap my brain around that and how that was so wrong.
Right. Right. Because they had gotten to a very picky definition of what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's just so much of a failure to rejoice
Yeah.
because they must have known him. It says he's been sitting there for years, right? 38 years he's been
Hmm.
sick. Good deal of that time he's been laying there looking for help. They had to know who he was. And all
Hmm.
of a sudden, he's not paralyzed anymore.
Right.
He's not got whatever his ailment was, he doesn't have it anymore, and he's able to get up and walk, and nobody says, "Yay," and nobody says, "That's wonderful."
Yeah. Well,
And
I'm
the
thinking,
priest certainly should have offered to pray with him.
yeah. Well, I'm 100% convinced that they knew who he was because the pools of Bethsaida were these two pools, and that's why there were five porticos. There was one that split them in between the two, and there was water that flowed into them, and it was the ceremonial water for the temple. It was right there by the temple,
Right,
and the priests had to go there to get the water. So they saw this guy sitting there for 38 years, right, waiting for. I mean, that was why people thought the angels came down and stirred up the water, which was, we now know probably just the water coming through.
right,
I also find it interesting that John never talks about the fact that people thought that there was this supernatural healing going on. He just talks about the healing that Jesus did,
right.
right? Just the reality of where real healing comes from and how sometimes we put our faith in the things of the world and what the world has come up with as these almost snake oil options.
Right,
And
right.
really, Christ is there the whole time if we just want him.
And sometimes we are like at the start of it, when Jesus says, "Do you want to get well?" And the man doesn't answer the question. He just starts
Yeah.
whining about how hard his life has been. That when he tries to get to the water, other people get there first. He's trying to get himself over there. And instead, a simple yes would have been wonderful.
Yeah.
Or even yeah, like you could really do it. Some kind of reaction to Jesus's actual question.
Right. Well, we know he didn't know who Jesus was, because otherwise he could have answered the Pharisee at the time, or the priest at the time. But the fact that that was his response, I mean, he was a pretty crusty guy at this point.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, I've been sitting here for 38 years, and nobody offers to shove me in. And I hate to say it, but what if he drowned? Like, I don't know that I'd want to shove him in either. You know,
Right, right.
what if you're not the first, dude? And then you're stuck in there and you die? Like, I don't want that on my head. I can't really fault people for not throwing him in the pool.
Yeah, that's a point.
So, and then I love the vision of the fact that this guy's looking for living water because that's what they thought this was.
Right.
That an angel came down and stirred this water and became living water. And we keep hearing this trend at this point. We got the wedding at Cana, we got the woman at the well, and here he is at the Beth, and he's constantly trying to tell people like, you're looking to earthly things to fill you up, but I'm the living water. I'm the one who's going to give it to you. If you guys would just open your eyes and recognize who I am.
Right.
You almost feel bad for these people.
Yeah, but they got to experience Jesus face to face, so I guess we can't feel too bad
And
for them.
hindsight is 2020. Like we consider me like,
Absolutely.
but you had Jesus, right? And they're like, we didn't know that until we knew that,
And
right?
we
And it
have
says,
Jesus too, just in a different way.
yes. But wouldn't it be amazing to just actually be one of these people who sat there and heard all this stuff firsthand?
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, that would be amazing. And I think also when you look at these passages that we're talking about, there was one thread I picked up on. The woman at the well felt unseen by her people and maybe even unwanted. Jesus never saw the official son in person.
Right.
We know from the story of Nathaniel's calling that he does see everybody, right? Because he saw Nathaniel in the fig tree, but he never saw that child, right? And then here we've got this person who felt unseen by the people around him. Nobody wants to help me. And so it's really showing how Christ, he's there for the unhelped. He's there for the unseen. And I think it really becomes this moment of encouragement that when you feel unseen, that nothing seems to be going right, it's okay because
Uh-huh.
Christ really does see you. And that was like this common thread between all of these stories.
Yeah. And I think it's not even big things, like you mentioned Nathaniel, Jesus saw him under the fig tree, and that was enough to make him believe. Jesus told the woman at the well that she had 5 husbands and this one wasn't her husband, and that was enough to make her believe. And so it doesn't even have to be big things that
Yeah.
make us feel seen.
Yeah.
It can be relatively small things, but things that hit to our identity.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, Karen, I really appreciate you joining me again this week.
Thanks for
And
having
next
me.
week, everybody, we will be back. You're welcome to pull up a chair and listen to us banter back and forth, having a good old time, just taking into God's word and learning from each other. So, I wish everybody a great week.
Bye-bye.